Hi everyone, thanks for joining me on this video related to Resident Evil Code Veronica. Since Code Veronica is going to probably be the subject of discussion for the next remake, I figured we revisit the 2002 manhua that was written and published, well, rewritten and published by Wildstorm in 2002, as it has some interesting story elements, interesting story beats, and things that just don't quite make sense in the way of how it was kind of compared to the Code Veronica game in this manhua. So let's take a look and let's do a little bit of a deep dive of the 4-book series that was rewritten and published by Wildstorm, while it was definitely broken out in many different volumes in Hong Kong. Alright, well, we have the 4 books here, and these are actually quite interesting and difficult to get a hold of for the 4-book series of the Resident Evil Code Veronica manhua that was republished by Wildstorm. Actually, the 3rd book, I believe, is one of the hardest things to get, and book 4 as well is a little bit difficult, but the part we're going to actually focus on is the first 2 books, especially during the transition between these 2 volumes. So as you can see, there's something that really kind of sticks out when it comes to the story element of Code Veronica. And you kind of guessed it, it's book 2 that actually shows Claire as a zombie or turning into a zombie, more so than just an eye injury. So let's just dive into it real quick and just kind of show the elements to it. And believe it or not, in comparison with the story manual that was rewritten, there's no difference. This actually was shown the same as far as images and story elements in Code Veronica of this one in Hong Kong versus, you know, the American published version by Wildstorm. So if you do get a hold of these copies, I do recommend you read them. They're actually pretty good. The only difference, of course, they take liberties is, of course, there's a lot more fist fighting versus in the game, but the actual illustrations and information is pretty good, and it's translated pretty well. But what's interesting is they really kind of sell the point in book number 2 and put it as a cliffhanger to show that Claire is actually a zombie in this. And the way it kind of shapes out is in the book, she ends up fighting obviously with a number of zombies and then ends up getting, you know, pushed down to the ground with even some bats that pop up. Interestingly enough, it then shows Steve kind of coming in later and following up to find out what's going on with Claire, as he's, of course, taking a moment to talk about how his dad needs to be rest in peace. And then, of course, he follows up where Claire is and wonders if anything's happened to her. And then this is kind of where it gets a little crazy and very much different from the story of the game. And he ends up finding these zombies, and of course he finds Claire's glove at the ground, all bloodied up, and she has to be all right, is what he's saying. And then eventually, what's interesting in the story is he ends up fighting a zombie that looks exactly like Claire, as you can see here. And the nice thing is that if you look in this image or pane here, it kind of doesn't show her attire on the zombie, but of course Steve is kind of mad and angry now because Umbrella has taken everything from him, including Claire, and a vengeance will be his. And the many questions are answered in the story. Is Claire really dead? Will Steve avenge his parents' murders? Learn all this in the book 2, which it even shows her starting to turn in her face here in the 3D image. And that's when you get to this book 2 and you see the fact that she has that infected image that's coming up, and it just kind of insinuates that Claire is obviously dead, and we're not going to see her again. In fact, if you look in the future books and titles and kind of the illustrations on the front, Claire's nowhere to be seen. So they're really kind of following through on this to say that, you know, Claire must be a zombie at this point, which of course it goes into the story, talks about how, you know, it kind of brings you up to speed of how Claire got there and also kind of Steve's background. But then it kind of shows from the events that happened with Claire and what happened with her. And of course, you know, as it kind of goes through showing her doing some kung fu fighting and some shooting and elbowing on these zombies, it does kind of show her fighting these things back and forth. And eventually, it does show and highlight that in this image here at the bottom is that her glove was actually taken away. Of course, it wasn't bloodied up other than the fact of her killing the zombie, but then moving forward. Of course, her attire doesn't come off, her vest doesn't come off or anything. So it kind of just shows a bit that Steve must have imagined it, as well as, of course, them trying to really push the narrative that, hey, Claire must be dead in this book 2 issue. And of course, Steve eventually meets up with her and helps her, like in the story of the game itself, where he's going against and saving her from, I always forget what these things are called. These little haberdashers, I think is what they're called. I think off the top of my head is what it is. And then it continues with the story through. There's definitely some liberties that they've done here with this story, and they do capitalize a lot more, and it gets a little bit more extreme towards the end, but it does, other than those few kind of outliers there, it does kind of stick pretty well to the game itself. But it is kind of showing, of course, in the marketing tactic that they've done, because this like image, don't get me wrong, the images inside the comic that shows her like this is very much the same as a zombie, you know, that Steve kind of fights and kills. This is in the manhua that's in Hong Kong, but the one thing that they did not show was the fact that her face is all infected like that. That doesn't exist in the manhua. Of course, there's like 20 or 18 more volumes that is shown with the different kind of visuals on the front of those volumes, but none of them show her, Claire, being a zombie or turning or anything like that, other than, of course, those little images that Steve finds. So just kind of something that's interesting I wanted to point out, and kind of a little bit of the extreme marketing that they did, at least on the US side when it came to the front image. Obviously, they left the cliffhanger there in the manhua so that you would buy more volumes, but it just goes to show that definitely that one time when Wildstorm highlighted and indicated that, hey, Claire Redfield is indeed dead and she is a zombie, and the mission of Code Veronica has failed for Chris, and especially for her savior, Steve. So that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.